So I'm working on this garden journal, and in the first part I was able to finish putting some coffee dyed papers together as pages, and then we added the front cover, added a closure, which is the seam binding, and then added the back cover as well. So we have our pages in here and the binding is done, and then we put gold paint on all the edges, so it's like almost like a gilded edge on this journal and on the different elements of the cover. Added a metal embellishment to the front, and this time we're going to work on adding some pockets and some tucks and just finishing up some of these areas. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have a small stack of coffee dyed paper, and I'm just going to take a little piece out of this coffee dyed paper and then glue it over top of the back of these brads. And this is just so that you could just do this, and one thing about coffee dyed papers, it's very forgiving, so if you glue one piece on top of another, it actually kind of almost like melts away. You don't really see it. So that's kind of nice, a thing specific to coffee dyed paper. But in this case, I'm going to cover up the back of these brads because this is going to be the area for a pocket. And I just want to make sure when I put things in the pocket that they're not getting caught up on the back of these brads. So you can see my glue is kind of stopping up a little bit. So one thing with this glue, which is the art glitter glue, it is the best stuff. Like when I actually watched a video about it, and when I first started using it, it was just like, this is it. I'm not going to use any other kind of glue because it's just so nice. So, but with the tips, you just, like, I have to keep pins nearby, and I actually ordered extra pins that are stainless steel. They don't rust, and that way I can just clear that nozzle out. So good to have some extra of those near you. And I always lose that pin too, so that's kind of a nice thing. They actually sell like an extra kit with pins and stuff, so I did go ahead and get that. That was actually really nice. But I love this glue so much, so I'm willing to do some little extra maintenance on those tips every now and again. So here we're just putting this piece down, and I glued that pretty heavy, you can tell, just because it's on top of some metal. So I just try to make sure I get a lot of extra glue on that so it'll stick. So now I'm going to take out some more paper, and I do make templates for pockets, and basically what I do is I just make a pocket, and then I just keep refining the shape until I feel like it's something that both looks nice, but mostly something that I can use, that I can easily stick things into, and that they don't easily fall out. So a lot of pocket designs, things don't really stay in them very well. So I just kept modifying this template until I was just happy with both the look and how it functions. Because in the front of my journals, I do like to put a large pocket, and then that way I can put in there like receipts or notes, or this is going to be a garden journal, so you know how when you buy a plant, you pull the tag off of it that has all the information? I can just put things like that in this pocket, and that way I'll have them for the future, and you know, not necessarily things I would always keep, but it gives me a chance to put them in an area. And it's, for me, it's always the front page and the last page I will put notes in. And that way I can, you know, write them into the main part of my journal at some point. But initially I can just kind of throw them in this front pocket. And like I said, I also always put in a back pocket. And that way I know right off the bat where things are going to be. So I do use templates. And then in this case, I'm just drawing it onto a piece of coffee dyed paper, and then I'll apply other things on top of this paper. So in this case, since the journal itself is coffee dyed paper, then I'm going to do all these elements out of coffee dyed paper as well. And this is typically what I'm using in a journal. I just really enjoy using this old coffee dyed paper, and I just like how the texture of the paper is when you write on it. So it is definitely kind of my go-to thing. If I was going to use like plain white paper, I tend to paint it or use distress ink on it first. I just like the look of kind of using base pages that have different elements on it than just a plain white paper. So here I'm just cutting off those tracing lines. And if some of them are there, that's probably okay if I'm going to ink the edges, because then it will disappear and I won't see it anyway. But when I'm tracing things, I always try to be careful to go back and cut all those tracing lines off. And that way when I'm tracing something, I don't have to worry about doing it in pencil. I can do it in a Sharpie or whatever. It's just as long as I'm careful to get that all cut off. So this again is the kit from Polka Art Studio, and it's an Etsy shop. And this kit, there are two different ones that have vintage botanical papers in it. And this one, the papers are printed so that, you know, you can fold it in half. And I think the other set is papers that are, I think, similar to these, but they're portrait. So again, this is called vintage botanical. But these papers, like each one of the designs coordinates really well with each other. So I feel like no matter what pages I choose, they're going to coordinate with everything else. And in this case, I just put that pocket area over top of a design to see, you know, what would look good when I cut it out. So just trying to pick a spot where, you know, obviously I'm cutting off some of the flowers and the foliage, but where I'm kind of capturing an almost complete set of flowers here, so that it just looks more like it was intended to be on a pocket. So just depending on the shape of the pocket and the flowers, sometimes I'll leave a border. You know, I would cut this smaller and then leave some of that coffee dyed paper border. Other times I'll just put it in the whole area. It just depends on the actual design. So in this case, I'm just making it a bit smaller, and that way you can see some of that coffee dyed pocket. So I'm just kind of messing around with the placement of this and how I think it would look the best. And I do have that one area where it's kind of sticking out a little bit, but I kind of hate to cut off that beautiful flower. So I'm not sure if that's a lilac or a butterfly bush. I'm not really sure what flower that is, but it is very pretty. So I am going to distress ink the edges, and sometimes I'm using just the plain old distress ink, like in this case, and probably like a walnut stain. That's usually what I'm using. And then other times I will use the oxide. In this case, I just wanted to get a much darker set of ink here. So I just went with this plain distress ink. Oxide tends to come out a lighter color than, you know, what, like let's say walnut, it comes out a much lighter color. So sometimes that works out, and then, but in this case I just wanted something really, really dark. So I use this applicator tool to do ink sometimes, but in other times I just use the actual ink pad, and I will just, you know, kind of rub it along the edge. It just depends. Every time I do that, I do get kind of splotchy areas, and sometimes that's what I want, and other times I just want to, like this printable, I just want to make sure it looks nice and not quite as splotchy. But in this case, you can see I'm probably going to take the actual, I don't know, so I do it all different ways. It just depends, but this is definitely an oxide. And what I'm trying to do is match some of the, or I should say pull out some of the colors in the flowers and just add different elements that would complement what's in the actual printable here. And, you know, with this printable, a lot of the distress inks or oxide inks, they look virtually the same color. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a wet wipe, so you can see that it's spreading that color out, and it's diffusing it a little bit, so it gives me a nice, almost like a whitewash feel. And since this is an oxide ink, then it will dry. You know, I'm using a wet wipe, so I'm applying some moisture to it, so it will dry and like a chalky kind of appearance, which again I think goes well with this actual digital kit. And I think it also blends in well with coffee dyed paper. So if I was to use something that was just like really bright and didn't give it more of a vintage feel, it could look out of place. It just depends. So I'm using some of my like mauve type colors, like, you know, like a Victorian velvet, and then another oxide here, more of a lavender color. So I'm just trying to mix a little bit, and it just brings out a couple of these different colors that are in the actual digital page, just to give it some extra interest. And also, since you're putting a pocket on a page, you just want to make sure that you can see it well enough to know that it is a pocket, and you can put things in it. So in this project, since on the pocket the shapes don't exactly line up here, I'm just trying to add different elements to it to make it look more like it was intended to be that way. Because I could trim this pocket to be the exact shape of the digital, but the truth is this shape of pocket really works well. So I'm just trying to make them, like, adjust it to fit each other here. So using my heat tool just to get this dried quickly. And of course that's great with using oxide inks. These are Ranger inks, by the way. And when you dry an oxide ink, then it gives you this chalky appearance. And the texture on these are so great. So I love using both regular distress inks and the chalk inks. They're really nice to write on. If you have pages that have the oxide ink on it, it's just a great texture. In this case, I won't be writing on it, but I think I'm going to do some additional stamping on this. So now I'm going back and I'm using that distress ink, the darker ink, for the actual edge. So you can tell, just adding like layer upon layer of different things just to blend it in with this digital, and then just give it a vintage look or an older look. And you can see it's kind of going sloppy everywhere, which actually for me, I like that. I think if it looked too neat and pretty, it wouldn't look old. So I do also though like keeping a lot of the coffee dyed paper showing, just so that like if I made the whole thing like the pink and the mauve, I don't know, I just feel like it wouldn't blend in as well. So I do like doing it just on part of it and then leaving a lot of that coffee dyed paper showing. So I'm putting a nice heavy layer of gold paint on this. Just feel like it frames it really nicely. And since we did the dark outline and then putting the gold on top of that, I think it frames it really well. And I'm going to bring out my heat tool again and just dry this really well. Since all these different elements are somewhat wet and I don't want to, make a mess on all these pages, then I'm just going to dry it really well. So what I did is I kind of picked colors out ahead of time, like 3 or 4 different oxide inks, a couple different regular distress inks, and then my gold paint. And I just kind of set them all out so that all the different elements that I add into this journal have a coordinating set of inks that I'm using. And I do try to limit it to like 3 or 4 so that the colors aren't going all over the place. I tend to like things that are more monochromatic. So that way I'm kind of limiting the palette here. Okay, so I do want to add a little bit more to the base of this pocket. And when I'm stamping, sometimes I will just, like I have these digital papers in a sleeve, like a plastic clear sleeve. And I will use this as something to stamp on or to paint on. And then I just wipe it off with a wet wipe. So for me, it's just really compact. So I don't have to get out my big, like, crafting mat. I can just do it. If I'm doing something in small scale, then I can just stamp on this little clear sleeve and it just wipes off easily. So this is a stamp from Prima, and at one point they came out with like 12 by 12 sheets of stamps that had flowers and different things. So I did buy some of those different sets, and they're so pretty, but I did cut them up so that I could store them easier. Because for me, storing 12 by 12 sheets of stamps, I just don't have like that large of a space to store my stamps. So I just kind of cut different elements out of it. But these are really pretty Prima stamps that are just kind of all over flowers, wildflowers, foliage. And so I just used like an area that I cut up, and I just kind of cut them up randomly. And now this is one of my favorite stamps. I always have it nearby. So this is a stamp from my favorite things. It is, I think it's called maybe Romantic Script. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up. So this is Romantic Script. It's a background stamp, and it is from my favorite thing. So not sure about the availability of it. Looks like it might be on back order, but this is definitely one of my favorite stamps that I always have nearby, and I use it all the time on all different things. So pretty. So I'm just kind of doing a random, stamping pattern on this, just to get that kind of hint of the script. And of course it's in gold, so it's not going to show up super heavy or anything like that, but it just gives you that hint of the script, kind of like the back of this digital it has like background of script all the way through it. So, and then I'm just wiping this down because I do use a lot of paint on this stamp. So I just want to make sure that I can scrub out as much of it as I can, since the actual script is really small. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not super small, but it has small areas. So I just want to make sure I get the majority of the paint out of that. And then when I'm using stamps, I usually put them in a pile, and then I actually run them under running water to, make sure I wash them off as best as that I can. So even the stamp colors, the ink or paint colors that I'm using, trying to use colors that look a little bit more natural. So a dark gray or a medium brown, just to make sure that it blends in with these natural digitals. So you can see that this pocket covers up that little patch that we put on it of coffee dyed paper. And I think this is looking really good. It's kind of has the look that I wanted it to, which is bringing out that one flower that's more of like a pinky mauve color. And this part of it, I'm just going to glue this down pretty well and get the edges really good so that nothing peels back. So I may in the future go back and add like a label or something to this or some other element, but I kind of like focusing it just on this digital, so I might end up leaving it just as it is. I'll have to see. So now when I'm putting down this pocket, I'm just going to do it really close to the edge. And anything that I glue here, which ends up by that closure, just strengthens it and reinforces it. So anything I can do to do that is helpful to make sure that when you're tying the closures that it's not going to rip free or rip the paper or anything. So this does help. And then obviously putting a pocket in the very back does the same thing. It reinforces that on the back side as well. So I think it's a nice idea to put pockets in the very front page and then on the very back page. Okay, so I'm just making sure that it's glued down and there's no gaps here on the side, because of course anytime you put things in a pocket, you don't want them poking through if it's not glued down really well. So when I originally traced the template onto this front pocket, I did 2 layers so that I would have kind of like the reverse side. I could flip it to the back here, and then I have this back pocket, and I'm going to do the same thing that we did on the front pocket. I'm just going to look for a digital that has areas of flowers that kind of fit onto this shape and size in the back. And I am going to just look for something that's a little different than the colors and types of flowers that I've done so far. So here I'm inking the back pocket here in scorched timber. So I was thinking it was walnut, but I'm pretty sure this is scorched timber. So probably the darkest brown in the distressed line. Alright, so I'm going to be getting a digital out in a moment and just picking what I think would look best in the back here. And then obviously inking around just these 2 front edges so that the other edges are kind of disappearing on this one. And I believe I have other digitals from Polka Art Studio. One is like a Jane Austen set, and I really love that one too. So it would be nice to check that out if you're interested in Jane Austen. I have a lot of different sets of different Jane Austen ones, and one is Medieval Mirage, which is another shop on Etsy, and then also Porch Swing Designs. And I don't know, I'm sure I have other ones as well, but that's one of my favorite things to search on is Jane Austen digitals, and then I can kind of go from there. So, because most shops obviously have a lot more than just, a few that, a lot of these shops have hundreds of different digital kits. So it's kind of fun for me to look through all of those. So here, just finding a light set of flowers in contrast to the ones we've done so far. Just these really light pink. And I just think this will be a nice, different kind of flower to choose on the back here. And I'm just going to add some different elements to this coffee dyed base so that it kind of fits in with this digital. So you can see there's inking. Well, actually, it's part of the digital, that nice strong border. I'm just rounding the corners here, just, quickly by hand. So I think I'm going to have to ink these other edges and just to get them all to match. And I'll probably ink it, thicker. And so basically it's just like a different angle that I'm going at it just to make this a nice thicker line. And also it gives it a little bit of a, I would call it like a raggedy appearance. And I think that also fits in with what is already on the other sides of this digital. So I'm just kind of making like a broader pass here. So I also love some junk journaling YouTube channels. Another one that I really like that is my favorite is Camellia Craft Designs. So she's kind of the main junk journal channel that I watch, and she has a style, I would say, somewhat like these digitals that is, I would almost call it shabby chic. I'm not sure if she would describe her own channel that way, but and then she uses a lot of botanicals as well. But she just has such a great personality, and I love the projects that she does. So she's definitely the main channel that I watch for junk journalers. So you can see when I ink this edge, it really does blend in with the printing that's already there. So that is kind of nice, because that way I can just take whatever chunks out of these digitals that I want, and then I can, just kind of make it all look uniform. And you can see I'm putting this gilding on, and I'm making it pretty chunky and kind of messy, but it's just really defining these edges so that it shows up pretty well. And so we're going to, like I said, we're going to add some things to this coffee dyed base, just regular coffee dyed paper. But I do like doing this because that way I have like the base of whatever different templates I'm doing really matches the journal pages, and then I can add like elements on top of it then that are something different. But I think it gives it a nice cohesive look for the journal. So I'm taking that same romantic script background stamp. That's my favorite things is the brand. And I'm just going to put some brown ink on it this time. So before I did like gold paint I put on it. So this time I'm just using some brown ink here. And it is archival ink. So the difference between like a permanent ink archival ink and then these distress inks, these distress inks will reactivate with any kind of water, but anything that, like if I used a wet wipe or something like that, they're going to reactivate. But these archival inks are permanent, so they will not. They will, you could add like sprays on top or other things, and that's not going to move. But the distress inks that I have inked around the edge, if you add any kind of a wet wipe or something like that to it, those are going to reactivate, which just means that it may smudge or smear, or definitely the colors are going to change a little bit. So it's good to be aware of the different kinds of inks and what they're going to do when you're working. And of course, in this case, and practically everything I do, I'm mixing the two. I'm mixing things that would, like watercolors, things that would reactivate with water, and then other things are archival or permanent, so that they're not gonna smudge, they're not gonna move around. This gold paint would be permanent, so if I got water on it, it's not gonna do anything. It's not gonna move around or change color or anything like that. But distress inks are made to reactivate with water, just like watercolors are. So it's just a different medium. So obviously I'm drying this really well. I've got like a thick layer of different things going on here, so I'm going to make sure I'm drying this all really well before I glue it all down. So we're going to do the same thing, gluing this back pocket, and that is just making sure that we're gluing it pretty well on the edges, because we just want to make sure that if we're sticking things in these pockets, that those edges hold really well and that there's no gaps. So if you put a piece of paper, like the bottom isn't sticking out or whatever. So this is obviously just the top layer that we're putting on here, and I am putting this on pretty thick as well. So yeah, if you do get a chance, I would check out Camellia Crafts Designs on YouTube. It is a great journaling channel, and definitely my favorite. I would say one of my favorites, but truthfully, it's the person that I go to watch all the time. So, and she's got a great catalog of videos on her channel that go through a whole lot of different techniques over the past couple years. So it's a great library to go back and learn all different kinds of techniques that you know, a lot of journalers are doing right now. So highly recommend that. Okay, so we have finished the base of the journal, and in the first video we did the binding and the covers and the closures, and then now we've added pockets to the front and the back, which I think are pretty important, because in any journal these are kind of like my go-to, where I can put all my notes in. So it's kind of important for journals that I do, and then again that reinforces these closures front and back. And then I just usually throw in like baggies or a plastic sleeve or something if I know the glue's still wet, and then I can still close it up, and I don't have to worry about pages getting glued together next time I go back into the journal. So thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed this, and I hope that you did too. So thank you.